Today we're going to be talking about genre. Genre is an interesting concept because it both can inform the way that we write and it also informs the way that people read our work. But it might not actually exist. Well, let's dive in. So genre, simply put, is a collection of works that have similar characteristics. That's it. Now, these can exist in all sorts of arts. Music has genres. Visual arts can be broken down into photography and sculpture and painting, and then those can be broken down into smaller genres, expressionist, impressionist, that kind of stuff. Literature and film also have genres, and those are really the ones that we're going to be focusing on. So it's a collection of works that have similar characteristics. In literature and film, these genres tend to be about the same. Yes, there are some genres exist in film that don't exist in literature and vice versa. But overall, they tend to be pretty consistent. And we tend to think of these as the way that books are organized when we walk into a bookstore. You have the thriller section. You have the murder mystery section. You have the western section. All these different books are organized by their genre. And the reason that they're organized that way is because they have similar characteristics. If you pick up one Western versus another Western, they are going to have similar characteristics. And so that means they're going to be doing kind of the same thing. And we're going to actually talk about what some of those characteristics are. The best way to really talk about this is to talk about, we'll say horror, right? We could talk about any genre. Every genre has certain rules that it follows. Genre rules. Horror is fantastic to look at because those rules have been done a million times because so many horror films and books are coming out. And so people tend to do the same kind of thing because Hollywood knows what works and you don't want to break too far away from it. Well, we'll get into all this. So let me tell you a story. In high school, I was part of one of those groups that every summer we would go to every single movie in the movie theater. And one of the movies that my group of friends loved to watch were horror movies. And so this is where we start getting into the power of a genre. When someone loves horror movies and has watched 5, 10, 15, 30, 50 horror movies, and they go into a horror movie, they know the genre rules. They know the rules by which that genre works. And that informs their viewing experience. So we do not write outside of genre. Everything we write is part of genre. In fact, people, you'll see it usually with snotty literary magazines. They say, we don't accept genre writing. All writing is in a genre. Even literary writing happens to be a genre itself. It has its own rules. Okay, enough of that tangent. Let's go back to this. So horror has rules. My friends would roll into a movie and they would know some of these rules. For instance, there's usually going to be a cat jump scare. Okay, let's see if I actually have this still pulled up. Oh no, I closed the tab. That's fine. We don't actually have to watch. I will link down below a supercut of cat jump scares in horror films. This usually happens early on. The main character hears something. It's behind a closed door. And the music starts to swell, right? That string horror sting that you know that says that something awful is going to be happening here. And they open up the door and a cat jumps out. And it scares them, right? It scares you. It scares the audience. And that's it, right? It's not really a threat. If cats acted the way that they are depicted in horror films, we would all have had a million heart attacks by now. So that's part of it, though. That's one of the tropes, one of the small things that the horror genre does, is that they have a fake scare somewhere in the beginning. And the cliched way of doing it is to do it by a cat. Okay? So that's just one example. We'll look at a couple here. The next one is who's going to die? Who in this horror movie is going to die first? And if you know the rules by which the genre functions, you start to figure it out pretty quick. Okay, so if you watch enough movies, you see that so-and-so, this type of character, tends to die first. And then once you've seen enough, you can come up with a rule that says, okay, if you watch another movie, chances are so-and-so is going to die first. In horror movies, and this has been played with, okay, so I'm really talking about in like the 70s and the 80s. Recently, people started playing with this because, again, you have to keep it fresh, right? You have to play with these rules. You could tell who was going to die. The people who are going to die tend to be lacking morals. Okay, they tend to be the people in the horror film who are drinking, smoking weed, perhaps having sexual relations. If you do those things and you're in a horror movie, bad news, you're probably going to die. Which means that the main character, the person who's going to survive, is going to be usually someone who has morals, who is pure in a certain way, and they tend to be female, and they tend to also be white, interestingly enough. Okay, now, again, these rules have been played with recently, right? Maybe there isn't a survivor at all. Maybe they don't have morals. Maybe they aren't female, maybe they aren't white, right? You can play around with these ideas. But if we are talking about horror as a genre, this is what dictates who dies and who lives. So if you see a horror movie, if you're one of my friends and you went in to see a horror movie and you saw people smoking and having sex, you knew that they were probably going to die. But it was the virtuous female that would have a good shot at living. Okay? So this is something that would inform them. Again, your readers are not in a vacuum. Film watchers are not in a vacuum. If they are reading your work, they have read other work, and those works have informed them with what your work might be doing. And this is where we can start talking about this. So, when do you want to confirm? Confirm genre conventions. And when do you want to subvert genre conventions? This is the question. So you are writing inside a genre. I already said all writing exists inside genre. And so you can either confirm those genre conventions, meaning you go along with them. So you have the cat jump scare. You have the character lacking morals. You have the survivor is the white female with morals, right? Those are all confirming genre conventions. When those things happen, you are doing what the genre says should happen. If you only confirm genre conventions, congratulations, you're not doing anything new. And the reader or the watcher, in the case of film, the audience, are probably going to be bored because they've seen this all before. So, the real question when writing inside a genre is, when are you going to subvert the genre conventions? When are you going to push against the expectation and catch the audience or the reader by surprise? For instance, the cat jump scare. Maybe you get rid of it, right? If every film has it and you don't put it in there, now you've done something new. Or maybe it's not actually a cat. Maybe this is some sort of threat. Now you're throwing off the pacing, right? Because usually it happens early on. It's a scare when there aren't many other scares. So what else could you do to play around with this? Maybe it's not a cat. Maybe it's an armadillo. Sure. Okay, great. Now I think you've made a comedy, perhaps. Again, with The Survivor, and I talked about how films now are playing around with this. Can you change this up? Or perhaps there isn't a survivor. That's become a a favorite right now. No one survives. If you subvert genre conventions too much, all of a sudden your story might jump the tracks and you no longer are writing in that genre, or your audience won't see it as such. For instance, another strong genre type of film is the romantic comedy. At the end of the romantic comedy, the two love interests have to get together. Have to get together. If they don't get together, congratulations, what you have written isn't a romantic comedy. It might be a black comedy. A comedy about relationships and how they really work and how they really end. If you advertise it, right? Advertise it. So the pre-existing knowledge, if you give the audience the pre-existing knowledge, or they think they have the pre-existing knowledge that the two characters are going to get together at the end, and they don't, your audience is going to be angry. They're going to be angry because they came in with a certain set of expectations, and then those expectations weren't fulfilled. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point, is that it caught them by surprise. It was so different that they hated it. And again, maybe that's the point. But maybe it's not. So this is an interesting thing. How far can you push genre rules before you go into something else? Mixing and matching genres is also interesting. You can have, say, the sci-fi western, right? Wow, that's been done. Cowboys vs. Aliens. There's a couple of others that are escaping my head right now. You could also do it the other way, the western in space, and then you end up with a TV show like Firefly, if you've ever seen that. So think about mixing and matching these, because now all of a sudden you have two different genre conventions that are interacting with one another. And how does that work? So I'll close this out by talking about what I think is one of the best films when looking at genre conventions, and that is the Scream franchise. It came out in the 90s, and then there was a number 4, I think, came out in the 2000s sometime. What's amazing about that film, those films, is that the characters inside the film realize that the murderer is operating by the genre conventions of a horror movie. And so all of a sudden you get this meta conversation going on. So they're talking about the conventions of horror movies as you are watching a horror movie. And that's a lot of fun. So I'm not saying you have to write something like Scream, but if you want to see a film that is self-aware about the conventions that it is using, check out the Scream franchise. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so there's so much to be said about genre, but what I want you to come away from this video, if nothing else, is that idea of when to confirm genre conventions and when to subvert them, when to break away and catch the reader by surprise, and when to do something the reader expects and how you might play around